Despite the logo there that says North Highlands and Islands Climate Hub, I realised that I'd done this. I think the last time I did the funding masterclass was either just at the end of November, beginning of December, just right before we rebranded, and had a sudden panic 2 minutes beforehand. So I haven't quite had time to change the logo, but we are the Highlands and Islands Climate Hub. And we are funded by the Scottish Government for 3 years. We started just in September 2021. And we're part of what will be a network of regional hubs to be established across Scotland. So far there is ourselves, who are the Highlands and Islands Climate Hub, and we cover pretty much all of Highland and Orkney and Shetland as well. And there is also the NESCAN Hub, who cover Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. The aim is for all of the hubs to be community owned and community led. So for the NESCAN Hub, they came out of Aberdeen Climate Action. For the Highlands and Islands Climate Hub, we've come out of initially being an award to Thurso Community Development Trust based on the kind of climate work that we'd done, and possibly a little bit of a rant that I had to Scottish Government. Those who know me know that I'm maybe prone to a little bit of a rant. But really, in that we need to look at that climate action is not happening in its own silo, that climate action is actually a route to solving quite a lot of inequalities in our communities. And it's something that needs to be embedded in all of our everyday lives, just being a bit kinder to the planet if we're going to address the climate emergency. So we should be embedding it throughout all of the work that community organisations do. So the aim of the hub, this is my very quick run through because we'll get onto the funding bits there. The aim of the Climate Hub is we are here to support with anything, basically. We're here to support community organisations in design, development and delivery of projects. We're here to provide what training we can offer. So you're here at this funding masterclass tonight. We'll shortly be offering carbon literacy training. We also offer training in developing your own net zero policies. And I'm currently looking into maybe some kind of training as well. It's along local place planning and climate action plans for communities. We're here to capacity build. So we have a membership, which I'll talk about at the end as well. So we have all sorts of forms and spreadsheets and all of the sort of things that you might need for doing a community organisation, kind of starting to build up templates of them to just make it a little bit easier. And as I said, we've got development officers, community engagement officers, and we're there to help with the design, development and delivery of projects. And that might mean just simply from somebody saying, we're really short of a volunteer to do this event. Have you got somebody that can come along, Joan? We'll find somebody who can come along, one of our members of staff that'll come along and help. One of the other key elements of the work that we do is we're actually a voice to government as well. We're in a very fortunate position at the moment where we have a direct link to the Scottish Government and to the Climate Change Directorate. So we're actually we're looking for the views of members to start helping to shape the new climate plan for Scotland, and we're very involved in that from the community aspect. But we also want to be able to give community voice to other government consultations and things like that that are coming out. We also have some funding that's available, just a little bit of funding, seed funding for either community engagement or to start projects off, up to £500 if it's just a community organisation doing it on their own, and up to £1,000 if you're looking at a collaborative community project. And then the one that I didn't mention was Celebrate. We love it when our members, when anybody across the region is doing something that's great, that we can go and celebrate it. We also last year did the Highland Climate Festival and the Orkney Climate Festival, and we're looking to put together a new climate festival for 2023. So on to funding. Kind of start off with really what the trends are in funding. Funding is vast and it requires quite a significant bit of time to try and get your head around all of the funding opportunities. So if you've been like me and has been a development officer, I've been a development officer for Thurso Community Development Trust, you will know that you get people sending you funds and emails, your social media becomes full of there's this fund, there's that fund, you're getting sent funding finders. It's difficult to kind of cut through it all and find out what, where where to go for funding, and also what's likely to be funded. You might have a community who are looking to do something which you're just like, where might we be able to find that funding from? Funding generally operates in trends. So what we've seen in the past few years is that obviously a lot of funding that was coming out was for COVID-19, either supporting communities or doing COVID-19 recovery. And that it was difficult if you were trying to do something else that wasn't related to COVID, it was difficult to actually find a fund. So it's important to, first of all, kind of look at where's the trends in funding. So the current trends in funding are very much along the lines of climate action, obviously cost of living crisis. There's a lot of emergency funds out there at the moment in terms of the cost of living crisis. Sustainable development, which kind of fits back into the climate action theme, is that funders currently are very much looking for whatever you're doing to be sustainable. And I mean, I'm putting that in that phrase of sustainable development. What they're actually looking for is that you're also considering how you're going to be sustainable in the long run. So it might be great to get a certain amount of funding in to start off a project, but how are you going to keep that project then going? As any of us who are involved in this kind of work know, that the likelihood of getting multi-year funding is quite slim. It's maybe getting better in some quarters, but certainly we're generally looking at 12-month, 2-year, 3-year funding. If you're looking at anything past 3 years, then that's a goldmine. Tell me where you can find it. Mental health and well-being, particularly as we recover from the pandemic, there's a significant emphasis on mental health and well-being and improving mental health and well-being. I'd also say that a lot of these things don't operate in a silo, because if you take the example of climate action, so we've got a couple of you here tonight that are looking at community orchards, that could also benefit mental health and well-being. So we have a community garden here in Thurso. It was done through Climate Challenge funding. It was all carbon outcomes. It was a climate action project, but actually I'd say that the greater benefits from that project are mental health and well-being. So things don't completely operate in silos. Youth employment and particularly skills development. I was actually at quite a large event in Caithness yesterday, and the key theme that was coming out of it, that was actually our economic regeneration partnership. We were launching a new master plan. The key theme that was coming out of there was a lack of confidence in young people in our area to be able to actually go into work and to go into study. So actually that youth employment, that skills development, that's something that's very key at the moment. Reducing inequalities, so creating a more level playing field is a key funding trend. That also goes hand in hand with cost of living crisis, and certainly in my mind in terms of climate action. Active travel, there is, I mean, active travel is essentially climate action, but there is quite a significant amount of funding that's around for active travel at the moment. And also digital engagement as well. If there was anything that we learned from the pandemic, it is that we can deliver things digitally, but also there is digital skills across Scotland that needs to be improved in some sectors of life. I've got in that box there, I've got partnerships and evidence-based, because that is, no matter what funding it is that you're going for a long time in the third sector, and in charity work, volunteer work, community work, really competitive in terms of funding. You would very much be, you know, like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you wouldn't be telling anybody what it was that you were up to, because you were too worried that they were going to go and apply for the same thing for funding. And it is still a competitive funding landscape. There's no doubt about that. There are a lot of organisations who are all tripping over themselves for the same funds. But certainly funders, a key theme that emerges in funding now is that they want to see partnership working. That if you can find another organisation to work with, if you can demonstrate that you're also working with things like your community plan and partnership, if there's a locality plan in your area, that you are working within partnerships, and it is also that it's evidence-based, which again is another reason to be working with things like community plan and partnerships, working with partners, understanding what the community needs are, and actually having some form of evidence of that. Having things like your statistics as well work really well. If you're looking at something that's very, you know, focused to an area, to a community. The Community Ownership Support Service, if you happen to be a development trust, they have a great system that they can key into, which Bethany may be able to find a link to, or that we can certainly put you in touch with Felix, who's at the Community Ownership Support Service, where they can actually key in and just get all of the statistics that you could ever possibly need on your place. And it's an amazing thing. I've done it for Thurso, and it's great. They can pull off whatever additional statistics that you want. But evidence-based also means consulting with your community, making sure that you're doing something that it is that your community wants to see and that they want to happen. So back on that slide there, I kind of spoke about climate action and community need and how things tie together. So these trends don't operate in silos. One of the key things that we see emerging from communities, and particularly at the moment, is things like cost of living crisis, mental health issues. So it's how you can tie that idea of climate action into community need. So a key example is community growing. Just as I kind of said before, is that community garden that we have in Thurso, it's mental health and well-being is the key thing that actually emerges as a benefit there. And the same as active travel. So you're addressing the climate crisis by maybe doing a project in active travel, getting banks of e-bikes, but you're also improving mental well-being, you're improving people being able to come together, same as improved green spaces. Food security, community larders. We have a plethora of community larders that have sprung up due to both COVID, cost of living crisis. They're reducing food waste, but they're also providing food security for those who are in need. Even concentrating on local food, and that can, so I mean, that's a climate action kind of project, and that local food, low carbon food, whether it's through community growing or whether it's encouraging people to shop on your local high street for local food and use local producers. Again, it's tying up where that community need is. And then there couldn't be anything more pertinent at the moment than fuel security. So if you're looking at projects in terms of energy efficiency, renewable energy, renewable heating, those are climate action projects, but they are also addressing a community need as well in providing affordable energy. So where to find funding? And if anybody else has got any ideas, they want to pop it in the chat or shout out. One of the things that happens to me when I start presenting is I can't see anybody's faces any longer. So I don't know what reactions there might be. But if you do have any questions or anything like that, pop up your hand and Bethany will interrupt. I can see Bethany. That's the only person I can see. This is my kind of top tips for where to find funding. There may be other places, but certainly at the moment, these are some of the better ones. There is one actually that I've missed off the list, which I'll go back onto. So fundingscotland.com should be first port of call when you're looking for funding. Funding Scotland is a database of funds that are available across Scotland. What I have always found particularly useful about Funding Scotland, well, I say useful and frustrating. Quite often you can do a search on Funding Scotland and you can look thematically, you can look regionally. It's got a few different search terms that you can put in there, but it will list both open and closed funds. So some funding is time limited. You've got to apply by a certain date, then they'll close the fund. They'll maybe reopen it again. The reason why I quite like it actually for being able to find closed funds, because then if I'm looking at a long-term project, then I can start to build a funding strategy to it. So it's maybe like okay, so I can't do them right now because it's closed, but I'm going to go and have a look at them. They're a good fit for my project. Who else have they funded in the past? By who they funded in the past, does that make it likely that I will get funding from them in the future? And I can get a real deep dive into who that funder might be. It's also frustrating because you might find the perfect fund and find that it's closed and it's not reopening until 2024. But it is like generally most of the funds are listed on Funding Scotland. The second one is the Argyll and Bute Funding Finder, and I'm hoping Bethany will post a link for where you can sign up for it. We're not in Argyll and Bute, but I think most people working in community development in Scotland are signed up to the Argyll and Bute Funding Finder. They send it out every month on the dot, pretty much first or second of the month. It's a colour-coded Word document which lists current funds. It's amazing and brilliant and really easy to follow and to go and have a look at. I genuinely find that to be the best funding finder out of any of the ones that I get. Signing up to newsletters will also help. Bethany actually produces a funding finder for the hub, and we'll talk again at the end about membership if you're not signed up, that you'll be able to get that funding finder. We also regularly do list on our social media where there's new funds that come out. There's various other different newsletters depending on what it is that you're looking to do. Scottish Communities Climate Action Network is another good one to sign up to and to join as a member, particularly if you are looking at a climate type project. They've also got information about other training sessions and things like that they do. I've got TSIs listed there. So your third sector interfaces, signing up and registering with them, they send out general funding finders as well. The other one that's worth a mention that I didn't have on this list is if you are in Highland Council have actually started to send out a little bit of a funding finder that they send out weekly. Scotland's Towns Partnership. You might not be in a town, so you might think that it's not relevant to you, but actually the Scotland's Towns Partnership is a very, very thorough funding finder that is sent out generally once a month. It is very long. It's sometimes about 60 pages long. So it's a very, very thorough one. I find the Argyll and Bute funding finder a little bit easier to use, but anybody can access the Scotland's Towns Partnership funding finder now and get that sent out to them. And it is worth it. It's not just relevant to towns, it's funds anywhere. Foundation Scotland. If you're in an area where there are wind farms, most of them, or a lot of them, it's actually Foundation Scotland who manage the community benefit funds. So Foundation Scotland is definitely worth having a look. And they also have some funds which are actually Scotland-wide, so they're not just regional to where you might have a renewable operating. Making use of networks, so depending on what type of project it is that you're doing. So if you're a development trust, then you might be a member of DTAS and that you're keyed into that membership. And they have various different either social media channels or emails, but the same thing is relevant to a lot of other projects as well. So if it might be a social enterprise, like yourself, Graham, we're kind of concentrating on socially growing in the Community Benefit Society. There's various different networks for social enterprises as well that their funding finder will be more skewed towards funding for social enterprises. Having an awareness of the main funders. So there are several kind of big funders and it's looking at what they might have available. One of the immediate ones that comes to mind is the lottery, and the National Lottery have got various different funding streams that are available. So having an awareness of what their funding is and what their funding strategy is. The big funders will have a funding strategy that they set for 3 to 5 years that kind of says this is the type of things we're looking to fund over this period. One of the good things about lottery funding is that when you go on and you look at their different funds that they have available, they'll actually tell you a percentage success rate in applying for that funding. So you know if you're going for maybe, say, lottery communities funding, that actually the success rate is around about 55%, I think, at the moment for it. So you'll kind of have an idea of how much effort you really want to go and put into it if you don't think you've maybe got a strong enough project, or you think that you do have a really strong project, then you can look on it as glass half full. Awareness of projects and who's funded it. So that's just when I spoke about Funding Scotland. That to me, when I was first starting out as a development officer, that was probably one of the things that helped me the most. Was I spent a lot of time looking at what other communities were doing, looking at what opportunities there might be, and having a really good scout around those projects. So when you do get funded by somebody, you have to make sure you've got their logos on your website, their logos on your posters and on your And on anything that you're putting out, there's usually funding announcements. So it's usually quite easy to actually find out who might have funded another project that's like what you might be looking to do. And that's a good route into looking at who might be able to fund you. Social media is, yeah, there's funds that come out all the time on social media. It's really taking the time to sit and make sure that you're sort of following all of the big funders, any kind of networks that you might be looking to be keyed in with, and they'll share when they have funds available. Out of all of the different social media channels, I find that Twitter is the best for being able to find funding. And I know that not everybody likes Twitter, but certainly for me, it's been the one that's been the most easy and the most straightforward. Even, you don't need to tweet if you don't want to. Just go on and follow all of the right people. And you are more than welcome if you want to go and register a Twitter, go and have a look at my Twitter and go and have a look and see who all I'm following, because that would be a good kind of starting point for you. So on to my funding top tips. First one is always read the guidance notes. So you've done all of those things, you're keyed up, you've got all the funding finders, you've got information coming at you left, right and centre. How do you know if that's actually going to be a good fund for you to go into? And that's the first thing, is don't waste your time thinking that this is the next great opportunity. I'm going to plough ahead into that application form. Always go and read the guidance notes first of all. My favourite one for this is, in Thurso for a long time, I have been sent, I don't know how many times, if I had £1 for every time I've been sent it, I wouldn't be a development officer any longer. I would be living it up somewhere. Is the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund. I have been sent that by countless people, including Highlands and Islands Enterprise, everybody. And every single time I go, that's really nice. Thank you very much. But the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund doesn't apply to settlements that are over 4,000 people. So we can't apply for that in Thurso. So, and it's just this tiny little thing that's away in the small print, but we would have our application refused straight away. So always go and read the guidance notes first of all. They will have things that you get various different things in guidance notes. There was another one recently, the Cora Foundation were offering funding for a cost of living crisis. But organisations had to have an income of below 100,000. So they were looking for your really small grassroots community organisations to apply for it. And again, that was another one that I was sent a lot at Thurso Community Development Trust, and it was like, we can't apply for that. We're too big now. So there will be that kind of guidance notes that'll be on things. So generally, area size is not one. That tourism one, that's probably one that sets it apart. But definitely you will find that funds quite often separate themselves, that either the income that you can apply if you've got an income that's over 250,000, or you can apply only if you've got an income that's under 250,000. That's one of the kind of key ones that kind of trips people up. Revenue costs, how much to budget. So I'll come on, I think, in a little bit as to the difference between revenue and capital costs. So when we talk about revenue, we're talking about ongoing operating costs. We're talking about salary costs. And then capital costs is your money for stuff or for buildings or for stuff, really. Revenue costs can trip some people up because if you're applying for staffing, people get tripped up sometimes that they don't include what your employer's costs are. So you might be offering a salary of, say, 20,000 per annum, but actually you've got employers' national insurance contributions and employers' pension contributions on top of that as well. So it's making sure that you have actually set a salary level that includes those. Match funding. That is another kind of part of where you might trip up on guidance notes, is that not all funders are looking to 100% fund what it is that you're looking to do. They like to have some confidence in terms of match funding, that you might be actually applying to maybe 2, maybe 3 funders. Getting that first one in the match that's the hard work. Getting the second one is usually a little bit easier once you've got the funding in place. My next one is to always be clear and concise and to tell a story. I think people think that when they're faced with a funding application that you need to use complicated words, you need to use the buzzwords. You don't. What funders are really looking for you is to just be clear and concise and tell a story as to how you got there. They'll have various different questions. Unfortunately, no funding application is the same. They're going to use different types of questions to get you to where you need to be. But it's like, why are you doing it? What is it that you want to do? What difference is it going to make? And really try and tell a story through that. You have to always remember when you're applying for funding, this is being read by somebody that's in an office somewhere. They might not have any knowledge whatsoever of your community, of your project, of your organisation, of what it is that you're looking to do. So the more that you can tell a story and be clear and concise in that story, then your greater likelihood of success with getting funding. A lot of funding applications ask you for what outcomes you're going to achieve. They ask you for outcomes. I'm now sitting on both sides of it, where the hub offers funding and I still apply for funding. And outcomes, I've always found writing outcomes sometimes a bit of a tricky thing to do, but once you've been in it for quite a long time, when you actually then go to, it is important to set good outcomes that are smart, so specific. Well, I think I've got another slide on it because I'll forget what it is. But that they are timely, that you can actually measure what your outcomes are, because then when you go to report on your outcomes, you want to be able to actually say that you've been able to do what it is that you said that you were going to do. So it's important when you come to doing that reporting, and also just being able to show the success of your project. You know, none of us really want to do a project which is just a one-year project or a one-off. We want to go on and develop that project. And so actually, by setting that kind of outcomes that are measurable, you can actually be able to assess yourself how successful or not you've been. The next thing is that awareness of your community. So having those statistics, and I'm hoping that Bethany has shared the link to the Community Ownership Support Service, and that they can actually give you a profile of your community. But things like the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation is another place that you can get statistics. So the Index of Multiple Deprivation, basically, I mean, it is a measure of how deprived your area might be or is not. But it's quite often a statistic that will be asked for within a funding application. Again, I said about community planning partnerships and locality plans. I'm fully aware community planning partnerships are not as active in all areas of our region, but in some they have been very active. And if you're in Caithness or in Sutherland, then there is very active community planning partnerships. And there are locality plans there as well, which have come from community-based surveys that have been done to identify what the community needs are and look at how we might be able to solve those as a community together and as a partnership together. Those statistics, so just as I said again, that there is that you can get from the Community Ownership Support Service, but even just having statistics on your area and on your community, and evidence as well. So do community consultation, whether it's a survey, whether it's standing on the street asking people about what they think about this, that, or the next thing. Have some form of evidence of community need as well within those kind of funding applications. So, as I said, match funding. The majority of funders do require there to be a match fund. It's very rare that, well, it's not rare. You do get funders that you can just go straight in, but particularly if you're looking for kind of higher levels of funding, they'll require you to have more than one funder available. Usually it's 2 or more funders. There are advantages to it. It shows that you've got a stronger application, that you've got more support for your application. The disadvantages to it is that timing. So you can have one fund that closes on the 31st of March. The next fund that you've identified might not be until the end of September. And your first funder, if you've secured it, they might be getting itchy for you to get started on your project, but you don't have the match. So there is definitely you have to definitely talk and communicate with your other funders, but it is generally, when you're going for those kind of bigger projects, they're looking for you to have some sort of a match. It's also additional work. It is that, it's like we're doing an employability project at the moment at Thursday Community Development Trust, and I really feel for those people who apply for jobs over and over and over again and they don't hear anything back, because funding can quite often be like that. You have to really sort of think about how you're going to weigh up how much time am I going to put into this, because you can put a considerable amount of time into a funding application to then just not get that funding, and it can be a little bit soul destroying. But I'm hoping if you follow some of my top tips, then you'll have much more success at it. But having to secure match funding it does make for additional work, because no two funding applications are the same. And you would think, if I write one funding application, I can go and look for my match funder and I can just write the same thing again. Not always, because they might be looking for something slightly different from you. They might be asking it in a slightly different way, or completely asking different questions. Paperwork that you need when you're applying for funding. So this is another thing where you can come a cropper, and it's probably it should be in my top tips, is if you are embarking on a programme of looking for funding for projects, get your paperwork in order. Even if you just have a folder on your computer which actually has all of these sort of things listed in it, that you can just get to hand very, very quickly without having to go off searching for it anywhere. So your governing document, your constitution, make sure you've got a copy of that. Make sure that you have access to, or can access, a copy of your most recent bank statement. That'll be asked for in any funding application that you're making. Make sure that you've got a copy of your certified accounts. I'm also going to add on to another bit onto that as well, is always try and make sure that your accounts are submitted by the right date. We've encountered a group lately who their accounts are late and they are now struggling to be able to get funding as a result of it. So make sure that if you're a registered charity, you're doing your reporting to Oscar, it's going on time, and that you do have a copy of that signed and certified accounts. If you've got any form of an annual report, your annual report might just go with your certified accounts. And we always have a kind of annual report that's in there. Or you might have a nice and all singing and all dancing annual report that you use for reporting to your board, or that you show online, or you show at your AGM. That should be something that you should have to hand as well, that you might be asked for. If you're going for bigger lots of funding, particularly anything to do with maybe buildings or owning an asset, anything like that, cash flow projections. I've got various spreadsheets that are available that if any of you are looking to do cash flow projections, then I'm quite happy to share that. And that might be something that we could look at doing a kind of funding or a training on in the future as well, or getting somebody in to do that training. If it's something where you're looking at making some money from it, you're going to need to have a business plan, and make sure that that business plan is up to date as well. That it's not, 12 months, 2 years old, that you've got an up-to-date business plan. You might also be asked for community evidence and community need. Sometimes some of the bigger funders, when I applied for lottery funding a couple of years ago, that was to the Lottery Communities Fund, we actually had to send proper reports, full reports on community consultations that we'd done, and list out the engagement work that we'd done. We also had to send a copy of our strategic plan. So it depends on who the funder is as to what kind of level of information they're going to need. So, and quite often in terms of a community consultation, we might just go and put something out on SurveyMonkey, and then we've got the evidence ourselves and we know it and we can recite it back in a funding application. But you might just occasionally, particularly if you're going for high level funding, have that funder that comes back and says, can I actually get the report of that community consultation? And then you have to go, oh, heck, it's all actually in our SurveyMonkey. We'll have to compile a report. So actually think about doing a report at the time, even if it is just cutting and pasting the little graphs out the SurveyMonkey. Letters of support. Now, this is one that I've seen getting asked less of. And in the past couple of years, but it is for some funders, it's still a really important thing. Is that some funders will ask you to submit letters of support from other community organisations, or it can be from individuals in your community that might support your application. Don't leave them to the last minutes, which some people can do. Try and get your letters of support, try and get your request out to other organisations or to community members in plenty of time to be able to get them submitted back into your funder. They're also usually quite often a nice thing to have. Some people do send out, when they send out asking for letters of support, they'll send out a generic template that an organisation can fill in. And you should do that. It would save an organisation a bit of time, but there's also other organisations that like to write them from scratch. We frequently get asked for letters of support. And if you are doing a project that's got a climate edge to it, then the Hub is quite happy to supply a letter of support to you. I've always been happy to do it as Thursday Community Development Trust for any organisations that are in our area. But I always like to know a little bit about the project and actually really write a really good letter of support to be able to send off. But it might be generic ones as well. So, writing a funding application. First of all, actually, before I go any further, does anybody got any questions on what I've done so far? I'm just trying to break up the sound of my own voice. Are we good? You're just smiling at me, Bethany. It's only you I can see. Am I good? Okay.
Sorry, I was going to ask, what if you are a new group starting out and you don't have your bank statement and so on and so on? How does that work?
The way that generally works is that when they'll have the boxes that are at the top, they'll have a section there that says, like if you're a new group, normally what you would need to do is still provide some form of a cash flow projection. They'll ask for that if you don't have the things like the annual report and things like that. You would still need to have the bank statement, because I'm presuming, would you already have a bank account?
So our plan is to become a subsidiary of a community development company.
Okay.
Under a terms of reference, so we won't actually have a bank account per se. We'll our accounts will actually be done through them, through their bookkeeper.
Okay, so it would need to be, because whoever is the funder, they're going to need to pay it into a bank account. Well, yeah. One of the main reasons that they ask for the bank statement is actually to just verify the bank details. So yeah. It would be the bank statement of that development trust that you would need to have. And you would probably be looking to then send off your terms of reference to that funder as well then.
It's just if they've got, the funds in the bank, I mean, they're not going to have the amounts you're talking about, over to 100,000 odd, but if they've got money, I just don't want that to prejudice our application, if you see what I mean.
No, but I think if you explain it kind of really well in the application, yeah. and you've got the terms of reference there. We had a similar situation in Thurso. We acted as a community anchor for our Christmas Lights group. The Christmas Lights group had basically sort of disappeared, and we found a group of mums that were prepared to take it on, but they didn't want at that stage when they were taking it on to have all of the responsibility of looking for insurance and doing all of those sort of things. So we kind of took them in underneath our wing and treated them in exactly the same sort of way. We had a terms of reference, and we kind of helped them. We did it with them for sort of 12, 18 months, where we were helping them with their governance and just building their confidence and things like that until they were able to go off and form their own organisation. But they were able to access funding. It didn't matter what the funds were for the trust. What they did was, or what I helped them with, was that they did like a little cash flow projection themselves as to how much money they reckoned they would have coming in and going out over a 12-month period. And then like they would submit the bank statement from the trust, but also the terms of reference between the two of us. So it's probably not that much different.
Okay, that sounds exactly right. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anybody else before I move on to actually writing these applications? Right, I'll carry on. So, writing a funding application. do the research. So everything that we've built up to so far, make sure you've read the guidance notes, make sure that you know what it is that you're going off to try and fund is something that's really needed in your community. It's not duplicating anything else. There's a community need for it. You know how much things are going to cost. You have a really good idea and a good picture about what your project is. Know your costs in detail because they're going to ask you in that funding application. Some don't, but generally they're going to ask you what your costs are. Even when you're going in for things like maybe the Tesco's Bags for Help, or there's a co-op that you can get nominated for, they'll still want to know a general idea of how much money it is that you're looking for, even though it might not be, you know, because that's dependent on where you get your tokens and things like that. But yeah, have a good idea what your costs are. The next thing that I've got down is 3 quotes. Now, some funders are actually getting a bit better about this. We've certainly found it a particularly difficult thing to do in a rural area. What quite a lot of funders will look to see, and it is generally what I'm talking about, is usually now it's your big funders. They want to see evidence of you having 3 quotes for a piece of work. So say you're looking to put in a community larder, a sharing shed. So they'd actually expect to see 3 quotes for getting your shed built, 3 quotes for getting your concrete laid. And in rural areas, it's really, really hard to get that because there might only be one tradesman that you can rely on to get it done. It is definitely something that I've seen disappearing now, but it is still there for some funders. There would be things like maybe if you were applying to buy land or buildings, the Scottish Land Fund, they would be looking for 3 quotes. They would actually possibly be looking for a procurement process, which is a whole other thing as well. But I mean, it's definitely worthwhile if you're looking for value for money, if you are looking at building something, if you are looking at having some work done, it's worth at least getting a couple of quotes, just as what we would do at home. We wouldn't always maybe go with the first quote because we want to see, you know, are we actually getting value for money there? In your funding application, one of the first things that they are going to ask you is, who are you? What is it that you do? For a lot of organisations, that's going to be fairly simple. You'll be able to write a fairly standard one that you can use for most applications that you go and put in. I used to work in a museum in Thurso. I wasn't involved in funding there, but I know that the funding applications that were submitted from there, the first, you know, like, who are you? What is it that you do? What's your aims? What's the aims of your organisation? However it is that they phrase it on that funding application. We had a fairly standard one because we were a museum. We did the same thing day in, day out. I've come from managing a development trust. We have loads of different projects that we're working on. So I don't have a stock standard one that I write in for Thurso Community Development Trust because it depends on what it is that I'm applying for. So if I'm applying for something that's maybe tourism and town centre related, I'll big up a little bit more of the track record that's about tourism and town centre. If I'm applying for something that's solving inequalities, I'll big up a little bit more the community support that we do and our sharing shed, things like that. If it's something that's more climate related, then I'll kind of big up that. So I just slightly kind of tailor the organisation track record. I always still mention what the track record is, but I'll place greater emphasis on some things that we do rather than others, because nobody who I'm applying for funding for the cost of living crisis wants to hear about what we do in terms of tourism. They'll ask for what your aims and your mission are, which might be included in that question about your organisation track record. So it's really good to have to have a good mission statement when you're doing a funding application. I mean, so I just said that I kind of tailor that organisation track record. My first sentence is usually always on a funding application. Once I've ticked boxes and put an address and phone number and all of those sort of things, is usually Thurso Community Development Trust has the core aim of making Thurso a better place to live, work and visit. By, and then it's kind of starting it. So having that aims and mission in there as well. As I kind of said before, a couple of slides back, tell a story. They don't know who you are. Don't worry about using jargon. Just tell a story. like the funder's not always going to know who it is that you are, and they just want to hear what your story is. Doesn't need to be, you know, you don't need to use all kind of flouncy language. You don't need to get yourself all worked up about it. Just tell a story about who you are and what it is that you're looking to do. Always be clear and concise and answer the questions. There's, you know, if you're not a concise writer, I'm not a concise writer. Can you tell? Because I talk a lot. I'm also not a concise writer. So I'll maybe like run something through Grammarly, something like that. There's loads of different apps that can help you with that kind of thing. You quite often have, well, one of the other reasons to be kind of clear and concise is you generally have a word limit. So you know, you can't go on forever and ever and ever. Now, this is just my way of writing funding applications, and the bigger the funding application, the more it is that I do it. Is this write, reflect, amend, proof, reflect, send? So if I have a particularly big funding application to write, then what I will do is I will make that the sole focus of my day. So I will get up in the morning, I will read the funding application, I will go and walk my dog, I will then sit and start drafting that funding application. And every time I feel like I'm getting stuck, because the nature of funding applications, quite often find that particularly some of the bigger funding applications you're writing, it actually feels like they can be asking you the same question over and over again without it being the same question. So it's quite important to be able to kind of step away from it and then go back to it as well. The next thing is like peer review. So get somebody else to read it for you. Get somebody else to read it for you that doesn't actually know anything about your project and doesn't know anything about really what it is that you're doing, because they'll then be able to tell you if you've told a story without using any jargon, and if they, you know, they can sense who it is that you are. Also, don't be afraid to use a bit of enthusiasm in a funding application as well. That funders are, that they're not necessarily looking to fund somebody who is, you know, something that is very professional and is very sterile. They're actually looking to see some enthusiasm and some passion for your project and for your community. Now, this little box that says 1 hour per £1,000. This is something that I was told quite a long time ago, and I feel that it has led to be true, is that generally, on average, the time that you commit to a funding application should be about 1 hour per £1,000 that you're applying for. Now, I've regularly applied for funding applications that are for 100k plus. It doesn't mean that I sit for 100 hours over that form, filling it out. It's all of that bit about doing the research, knowing your costs, you know, having evidence of what your community needs are. All of that goes in towards writing that funding application. So when you're writing one that is for a significant amount, you've done all of that backstory behind it. It might also be like also, if you're only applying for £1,000 and you feel like this is taking you days and days and days to write, that's also okay as well. I have regularly written funding applications that have been, sometimes the ones for £1,000, £2,000 are actually harder than the ones that are for £100,000, or just because you're trying to get it right. So don't beat yourself up if you're taking longer than an hour per £1,000. That's probably, that is the experience development officer, that's kind of what you're looking at. But that's the general kind of amount of time that you would be putting into things, which also then gives you an indication of this idea of like funding is quite hard, and can be a little bit soul destroying when you're putting all of that time into writing funding applications and you don't actually know if you're going to have any success or not. But that gives you a general indication of the sort of time that you should be spending on writing a funding application. The types of the questions that are asked. So just as you're, as I've said, there's no two funders that ask the same questions, unfortunately. Life would be a lot easier if they did, but they don't. So, but when you're faced with that funding application form, what they're going to ask for is the basics of your organisation details. So in terms of that, they'll ask, are you a community interest company? Are you a SCIO? Are you a community organisation? like what type of organisation it is that you are. They might also ask you how many board members you have. They may also ask you to confirm that your board members are unrelated, those sort of things. Some funders, Foundation Scotland, for example, if you're applying to Foundation Scotland, they actually have a template that they supply to you during the time that you're writing your funding application, where you actually have to list all of your board members on it, and some board members' details. So it's another thing, is it's well worth, if you are being appointed as the kind of person to do the fundraising, have some sort of a file somewhere where you've got all of your board members' details on it. You might even have to go as far as, for some funders, I've definitely seen that I've had to submit dates of birth. The lottery in particular, they ask for kind of 2 board members to be listed on it, and you have to submit home addresses and dates of birth and things like that as well, because they do a anti-money laundering check on their funding. So yeah, the basics of your organisation details, the type of organisation you are, if you are a registered charity, what your charity number is, your accounts figures from previous years. So that's quite often asked in a funding application, is what was your income in a previous year. So then, you know, you should have an awareness of what your balance sheet basically says and what your accounts say, and where you can pick out that figure, or that somebody has supplied you definitively with that figure. Who is your organisation? So that's just that bit about, like, who are you? What is it that you do? What is it you're looking to achieve? What's your aims? And again, just that top tip is tailor that for the funder. So if you are looking for something that's tourism related and you do a bit of tourism work, then tailor it there. If you're looking for maybe some mental health funding, then tailor it more towards that. So I'm just thinking, Elizabeth, maybe for you with the WIC Society, you've done so many brilliant things with WIC stories and all of those sort of things as well, so that you might be looking for something that's tailored more to the museum side of things, and tourism related, and getting visitors into the area. And so that's, you would kind of big up that side of things. Or you might do something that's more about the importance of having the museum for people to come and visit and to spend time in to improve their mental health and their well-being, because that's a, you know, that is an element of funding that you could be looking at. So you would kind of tailor towards one or the other. What is it that you're looking to do? So again, and going back to this, being clear and concise. What are you looking to do? Why do you want to do it? How are you going to do it? So, and also having that evidence of need. So that, like, what is your why? Why is it you want to do it? So I'll use an example of the organisation that myself and Graham are also involved in, is Thurso Community Benefit Society, which is kind of more commonly trades as socially growing. We've got a zero waste refill shop, and we've got greenhouses. So it's kind of part of the trust. The Community Benefit Society is kind of our trading arm that enables us to have this shop and these greenhouses. And it's great. We have a shop and we have greenhouses, and they are there to help people to shop plastic free. And the greenhouses, once they come online, will be growing local food, growing plug plants, lots of kind of climate action type activity going on. But the actual real reason as to why we have that project is there is significant evidence of need in the community of Thurso, that there's young people who are getting left behind, who aren't able to access employment, who are struggling even in accessing mainstream sort of further education and things like that. There's a big gap for them. And certainly during COVID, there's been a kind of mental health and addiction crisis in Caithness. And that's actually what that zero waste shop and those greenhouses are for, is to give those young people an opportunity to access training and employability. And that's what our community need is. We're just happening to do it through a zero waste refill shop and through greenhouses. We might have picked something else to do it via. But that's actually what the real evidence of need is in our community for those things to happen. What are the outcomes? So you'll be asked in a funding application is, what's the outcomes? What is it that you're going to achieve? When is it you're going to achieve it by? And that can be anything from how many people you're going to engage, what's the benefits that's going to happen from your project. And then how will you monitor and evaluate it, which is an important thing to think about when you're putting in for funding. It can be very, very easy when you're met with a funding application to say that you are going to do all of these amazing things because you think that's how you're going to get the funding. But actually be realistic about it, because you're going to have to monitor it and you're going to have to evaluate it and you're going to have to report back on it. And if you've said that you are going to get 200 people along to this community garden open date and actually you get 20, your funders are then going to say, well, what happened here? So be realistic about it. 20 is a good number. You don't need to embellish on it. So again, this SMART outcomes, and what are they? So I knew I had it somewhere because I always forget what they are. So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So it is that, and this for me was a real like, okay, I get it. I need to be specific about what it is that I need to do, about what the outcome's going to be. It needs to be measurable. It needs to be achievable and realistic. And I need to set some kind of time limit on it. But actually what helped me really get it through and I always found that outcomes, I felt to begin with that they needed to be quite flowery and quite full of jargon and things like that. And actually they don't need to be at all. But then it came back to me, it was like my top tip for doing it is actually think about when you're writing an outcome, how could I, if I get this funding in 12 months' time, how can I write a report that I've been able to monitor and I've been able to evaluate how successful I've been? And that would be the best kind of tip that I can give in writing outcomes for funding applications. Some funders don't ask you for outcomes, but there are a lot who do. Some might ask you, so say for instance, Foundation Scotland, theirs is it's quite number based, and some things you can't provide an outcome for. So how do you say that you're going to improve, if you say you're going to improve people's mental health and well-being? Well, how can you really measure that? You can't really measure that. There's different tricks that you can do to it. We've done it, and I still don't think that it's completely a good measurement, but we try to get anybody who comes to us for a project when they're starting to volunteer is that they do just a really, really short survey with us, which is, it was initially just based on smiley faces. How did you feel before you came to this activity? And then doing another one as they're leaving. So how did you feel afterwards? But you still need to kind of report on something. So how can you monitor and evaluate whatever your outcomes are and try and base them around that? And just be realistic. Funders don't, they're not expecting to hear that you're going to engage 200 people if you're really not going to engage 200 people. Sometimes quality is better than quantity. And don't be afraid to kind of go, well, actually, this might only benefit 5 people, but then what is there a real benefit to that? Don't be afraid to do that, because it needs to be achievable and it needs to be realistic. And then in terms of timely, it's just like by funding end in 12 months, that you've got some kind of a measure where you can say that's where we can say that we've achieved some form of success. Or we need to look again at what we've done and maybe change things, because do you know what? Life's a learning experience. Not everything goes right first time, but you can learn from it. But that's from these SMART outcomes. That's what we're looking for is, and actually just, again, with that, be clear and concise when you're writing outcomes and funding. You'll then be asked for finances, which can be the bit that makes a lot of people feel like they're going to shrivel up and die. Have depending on how it is, a lot of times now you're filling out an actual application online. It's not going to add it up for you. Some of the really nice funders that have got really fancy funding applications, they will add it up for you, and that's very nice. But maybe have a spreadsheet to hand, get somebody else to check your numbers if you're not sure. If you are looking for staffing, then always make sure that you include your own costs. So that's your employer's national insurance and your employer's pension contributions. For anybody who struggles to work out what that might be, I've got a template spreadsheet where you can just put in, you can actually literally pop in the salary. It will do the on costs for you. if you are looking, even if you're looking at a part-time post, it'll do the pro rata calculation for you as well. And it works on what the current statutory levels are for pension and employers' national insurance contributions. And we're quite happy to send that out. On funding applications, when they ask for, sometimes on a funding application, they won't just ask what your income is of your organisation in the last financial year. They might also ask what level of restricted and unrestricted funding you currently have available. So restricted funding for charities is funding that is money that you basically have, which is there to fund a certain activity. So it's come from funding in the first place. Unrestricted funding is what your free funds are that you can spend on anything that you want to. So that can be that it's come from earned income. It could be that it's come from donations. That used to be quite a thing, had kind of gone away for a while. But if you had a high level of unrestricted funding, then you might find it difficult to access funding, because they would basically say, well, why are you not using your own money? One of the key arguments against that is if you are a registered charity, you should be looking to have at the very minimum 3 months of operating costs in your bank account, ideally having 6 months. And that's your argument. That's your kind of counter argument. Quite often it'll ask, what's your restricted funding? What's your unrestricted funding? Why are you not using your unrestricted? Why is your unrestricted funding not available for this project? And that's your answer, is that we required to keep as a minimum 6 months worth of operating costs at all times, which is why we're not able to use our unrestricted money for this project. Revenue costs. Why have I got that in there? Oh, I think that's just me. I'm going back to staffing costs. But revenue costs. What's your ongoing costs for running this project? So it might be that say you're looking to do a series of food workshops, and the money that you're thinking about popping in for is you're thinking about, right, well, I need the staff time or a sessional worker time. I need the food costs. I need to buy bowls and pans and these things. But what you've maybe not thought about, because you operate in a building that generally has its lights on and its heating on all of the time, is how much of that lighting and heating is going to cost while you're running that activity. So you should look at putting in something towards revenue costs as well, if you are operating something within your own facility, so that you're covering for the duration of doing that activity or that project a little bit of what your overheads are. It's working in this kind of sector, as we can get in funding for the next bright shiny project is an awful lot easier than getting funding to keep the lights on. So it's important to kind of have a look at, well, how much would it actually cost us to run this activity within this building, within this facility? Be aware that funding is quite often paid in arrears, not for all funders, but particularly the larger the funding it is that you're going to, you actually have to spend the money first before they pay the money back to you. It's getting a bit better. There's definitely a lot more where you get the funding in advance, but yeah, quite often it can be in arrears. So have you got the cash flow to support the funding that you're going for, particularly if you're a new organisation or if you're planning a really big project? Have you got money in the bank that you can rely on while you get that funding claim in? Because funding claims can also take a little bit of time to put together. But it's definitely one to be aware of, that you might have to be actually claiming this funding. So doing the project, doing the spend first, and have you got the money in the bank to be able to cover that, to be able to get it back in again. One of my favourite stories is when Thursday Community Development Trust was just first starting. The first piece of funding that we got was for a tourism development officer, and we got the funding from Leader and from the Caithness and North Sutherland Fund, both of which was we had to spend the money to be able to get the money back. It was our first project. The only money that we had in the bank was from having done a couple of coffee mornings. And we were very fortunate because it was leader funding that Highland Council arranged for us to get a 0% interest loan to be able to cover it, our kind of initial costs until we started getting the funding claims in. But I remember our tourism development officer had started in December. He got paid the first month out the coffee morning money, and then we were getting into the second month into January, and we'd submitted everything for the loan for the Highland Council, but of course there'd been Christmas and New Year, everything was getting delayed. And the night before, I was like, we've got to pay this person tomorrow. And we literally had nothing in the bank. And I was kind of like, Highland Council are telling me the money will be in, the money will be in, the money will be in. And I was literally ready that we were just going to have to do a whip round first thing in the morning to pay this luna's salary from all the board members and myself as a volunteer. But lo and behold, I got up the next morning and Highland Council had paid a nice lot of money into our bank account and his wages had gone out nicely. But it can be pretty hairy, like making sure that you've got the cash flow to support it, particularly if you're new, you're starting off, you're planning a big project. Have you also got systems to record your finances? So when you're starting off, do you know how to use Microsoft Excel? Can you record that? Can you record your funding spend? Because you're going to be asked for your funding spend. If you're a bigger organisation, bigger organisations are probably going to have accountancy packages and things like that as well. But it's also not traditional accountancy packages like Sage or QuickBooks quite often don't work just brilliantly well for being able to evidence funding spend. You can certainly record the bookkeeping in against it, but it's not, when you're managing multi-projects, not always the best thing to be using. But do you have an accompanying spreadsheet that you can use alongside it? And then are your numbers right? So check them, double check them. When it comes to doing funding claims, I regularly do claims to both the Scottish Government and to Highlands and Islands Enterprise, both of which, for the funding claims that I have to submit to them, they use a Word document, and I'm listing every single item of expenditure, particularly for this organisation. I have to cut and paste them out and use a spreadsheet for it, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to I would never get it right when I'm adding it up. So if you're not great with numbers, do you have somebody else that's great with numbers that can help you with it? But it's really important to try and make sure that you get your numbers right, particularly if you're having to claim the money back, and if you happen to miss something, then make sure that you're getting all that you're entitled to. Monitoring and reporting. So different funders have got different requirements. You would monitor against outcomes, hence why your outcomes are so important. I think the only tip that I can really give is record everything. You don't know what it is that they might come and ask you for. So number of participants. Have you got an evaluation form? Again, that's something that the hub can help you with. We can give you a kind of generic evaluation form that sometimes just getting a look at an evaluation form can give you an idea of, okay, that's what I want to have and I don't want to have that. The funders themselves might have specific recording measures. So some funders might actually give you an evaluation form that they want you to use. That sometimes happens with certain festivals, things like Green Health Partnership. They've got their own evaluation form that they want you to use. Take pictures. If you're doing something, take pictures of it. Funders want to be thanked. There's a reason that they're funding you. They like having publicity and all of those sort of things as well. So they like to see pictures getting posted in their social media with a thank you to the National Lottery, thank you to Caithness and North Sutherland Fund, whoever. Press and social media analytics. So if you are doing press releases and you're getting stuff in the paper relevant to your project, then funders will sometimes ask to see copies of that. Less likely currently social media analytics, but getting more. I've had a couple of funds lately that I've had to kind of report what our social media analytics are. So what was the reach when we put that out? If anybody's particularly interested in that side of things, there are social media courses that we can refer you on to, or I'm hoping that our membership and comms officer is going to develop a kind of social media training as well. Always acknowledge the funders, so thank the funders. Have their logo on your poster. when you're putting out social media, say, you know, thanks to Highland Council for this funding, thanks to the National Lottery for this. Keep a record of your financial records, just as we covered on the last slide. And be aware of what your reporting dates are. Don't be surprised. There's nothing worse than forgetting. If a funder has set you that they have a certain date that they want you to report back by, and that you forget about it, and you suddenly discover the night before by getting an email to say, have you submitted this? Don't get surprised by it. I use my email and I pop into the calendar with the reporting dates that I have for funding. Keep everything, emails, paperwork, and record everything. I'm a big believer in that. It's just, yeah, just keep it all, because you just don't know when it is that you're going to need it again. And if it's not your funder, then it's your accountant at the end of the financial year who's asking for it. So it's just better to just keep everything. And then have case studies. So don't be afraid if you can't be creative in reporting. So this is in terms of like outcomes. So maybe you planned to do something and you said that you were going to have that 200 participants. And actually, do you know what? That's not what happened. You got 50, but they all had just an amazing time, and there was a real impact by what it was that you did. Don't be afraid to then go and use a case study, even if you got your 200, your 250. Don't be afraid to approach a member of your community that might have benefited from your project and to write a little bit of a case study. Funders love that, because actually that's a greater evidence of impact if it has made a distinct difference in the life of somebody in your community by whatever project it is that you've done. We are nearly there. Funding claims, the bane of my existence. I much rather prefer applying for funding and sitting and wishing and hoping that we get it than actually doing a funding claim. Set aside time to complete it. Just set aside more time than you would think that you're going to need to complete it. Be timely. So when does the funder expect a claim? You know, do they expect you to be claiming quarterly? Do they expect you to not be claiming until after the project's finished? When do they expect you to be claiming? Have your financial information ready. So don't get yourself into a situation where you've got a pile of receipts sitting on your desk and you're gonna, but now I've got to do my funding claim, but I've not actually recorded any of those receipts. Record things as you're going along, because it'll make your life so much easier. Be precise, check and double check all of your figures. Have sound finances and procedures, which is just, that's, you know, goes for anybody who's operating a charity, to make sure that you've got a financial process and procedures, and you've got that kind of mechanisms in place. If it is because you're paying staff, have sound payroll procedures. Much easier to have a payroll where you have copies of pay slips that you can send them off. Also much easier to have payroll processes that actually do show sometimes what employers' national insurance contributions are, and that they show the employer's pension contributions. I found this out to my cost most recently with Highland Council. And that we had somebody on a kind of employability placement. Actually, it wasn't with Highland Council, it was with SCVO, so Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations. We used Sage Payroll. I didn't think for 1 second that it did give a cumulative figure for employers' national insurance contributions, but actually our Sage Payroll payslips weren't actually listing the employer's national insurance contributions singularly on each payslip. So I then had to go and send an additional spreadsheet that kind of had a breakdown of all of that information. So check that those things are getting included on pay slips, because you're going to have to send them off to the funder potentially. Always be prepared for audit. Have I ever been? No, we've never been audited by a funder, but that doesn't mean to say that it's not going to happen. Do make sure that what you're recording is right, and that you do have the copies of your invoices, your receipts and things like that, that you do have them all filed away nicely, just in case a funder does decide to come and audit you. I tell you, actually, we did with Climate Challenge Fund. They would, every now and again, they would ask for an audit where they would ask you to send all of your invoices and receipts. But that was a big funder that we had a lot of invoices and receipts, and we used to get to send a summary, and then every now and again they would say, actually, can we get them all? Double check and reference to your bank statement. So with that, you may well have to, when you're sending off a funding claim, that it's not just invoices and receipts that you're having to send off for that funding claim. A lot of funders are getting a lot more light touch now, where you don't have to send off all of the invoices and receipts, but there's some of them that are not. I think I probably wrote a lot of this with Highlands and Islands Enterprise in mind, where you do have to send every single invoice and receipt. You do have to have all of this sort of evidence. You do have to have your bank statement. They will check through all the bank statements. So make sure that what you are popping into the funding claim matches what's on the invoices and the receipts, and matches then what's on your bank statement. I also generally prefer to, when I do have to send off a bank statement to a funder to do a funding claim, is I will go through that bank statement. I'll highlight the things just to make it a little bit easier on them. I think I also hope that it means that they'll process our money a bit faster. I'm sure what you're claiming for is what you said you would spend the money on. So if you said that you're going to spend the money on spades for your community garden, and you actually spent it on forks for your community garden, if that was a stipulation of your funding, then speak to your funder about it. Funders are usually quite happy to be fairly flexible, in that if something has ended up not costing you the money that you thought it would, and you could actually use the money for something else, give your funder a ring and ask them, can you reprofile it? Can you change it over into something else? Not usually, it doesn't usually happen for great big sums of money, but if you're just moving things a little bit from one place to another place, that's usually fine, and funders are quite happy to work with you. I've got on this last one is get used to using Dropbox or similar file transfer systems. I think, again, that's probably as a reference to Highlands and Islands Enterprise, because they use a very strange system that for doing your file transfer systems. But sometimes some of the things that you might be having to send to a funder are actually pretty large files, so you might have to use Dropbox or something similar to that. So my final top tips. There's no one golden avenue to find funding. I wish I could tell you that there's one thing that you could do that would be, this is going to be all of your funding dreams answered, and this is where you're going to be able to find funding from. It doesn't work like that. It can come out of left field from all over the place. Even today, I have a member of staff that came to me with a funding opportunity, which I have never heard of before. So, you know, things can come from all sorts of different places. It is that just the best thing to do is to just do the research, build the networks and the resources, have a kind of thing where you start to have a good idea as to where you're going to go and have a first look when something comes along. It's quite easy to be that, especially if you're maybe a project officer or you're a volunteer, that you get a bit of funding in, you go off and you do that project, and you don't you're not keyed into that networks any longer. So then you've got to feel like you're starting all over again from scratch. But if you kind of maybe start to build them on your social media, you know, if you just do a Twitter that's just for following certain funders, then you can kind of dive back into it again. Or you get that that monthly funding finder from Argyll and Bute. Even if you're not currently looking for funding, sign up to it, stick it in a folder in your email, go back to it when it is that you next need to go and look for funding. So do the research. I don't know if I had picked this up before. So understand, I've got on here, understand that the Scottish Government policy is a national framework. Funding trends generally follow this, which is true. When the Scottish Government when they set the national framework, which we can send out to you as in a link so you can find the current national framework, generally funding trends follow in behind that. When the Scottish Government starts doing something with their communities fund, generally other funders will fall in behind it. So the best example that I can give you at the moment, and we'll have to see who's actually been funded from it, is the large Scottish Government fund is investing in communities. Now, with investing in communities, there are lots of community organisations all across Scotland who have got applications in at the moment. And that fund was generally more towards social aims in the past, but in this last release of the Investing in Communities Fund, they have asked that anybody who's applying for that funding, they have to say how they are doing some form of climate action with the project that they're looking to do. And it's kind of caught some groups in the hop, because a lot of groups in Scotland were previously funded by the Climate Challenge Fund. That's been rolled into Investing in Communities, and they've suddenly gone, oh, well, hang on, we don't tackle inequalities or do any form of kind of community support in our community, and we're having to say how we're going to do this, and we do climate action. And then all of the groups who tackle inequalities and don't think of themselves as doing climate action, they're suddenly having to say, well, can we do some kind of climate action with what it is that we do? So that is going to be a big trend there, and you can see it. You can see it through other funders. Some of them have been at it before the Scottish Government, but a question that will be somewhere in funding applications: how are you going to be sustainable? How are you going to be environmental? That's generally, that's a big funding trend that's in there. And again, that's something that we can help with at the Hub, is just your organisation have an environmental policy, a net zero policy. We can help you to put that together. Other top funding tip is more research. Look at other projects, who funded it. So you've got an inspiration for a project. You've maybe seen something that's popped up on your Facebook newsfeed. That looks great. That would be great in my community. Go and have a look at, see who funded it, because the likelihood is that they might be able to fund you to do the same thing. Have a strategy, think bigger picture. So this maybe applies to more if you're a bigger organisation, or if you're looking to achieve something that's a bit bigger. I always kind of start off the year with sort of our like we have our project list for the trust. So who do we think, where's the funding coming to an end there? Where do I need to find more funding? Who am I going to get to fund it? Oh, but hang on, maybe I need them to fund that thing and not that thing. So have some form of a strategy and kind of think of the bigger picture when you're looking for funding, which again goes back to do the research, have a good idea what funds there are that might be out there. Have your numbers right. So yeah, have your numbers right. Just always have your numbers right. And that's my top tip. You might choose to write funding applications in a completely different way, but I certainly like that. Plan, reflect, write, reflect, review, reflect. Is writing a bit, walking away from it, writing a bit, walking away from it, writing it all and then walking away from it. Or even just starting with building up that application if you're feeling it quite daunting, starting off with bullet points and then starting to flesh it all out a bit. Write clearly and tell a story. Don't worry about using jargon. Don't worry about using fancy words. Just write clearly and tell your story. Don't give yourself any nasty surprises. Check what's required. So check that criteria. Always check the criteria. Always go in, check the small print, check to see if you can actually apply to that fund. And if you're in any doubt, you can give us a shout here at the Hub and we'll be quite happy to have a look through it and be able to tell you. And then don't waste your time if you don't fit the criteria. So don't spend hours and hours of your time and actually don't spend any of your time getting your hopes up and then you find that you don't fit the criteria, because that's quite devastating as well. And then record everything. Make sure that you have recorded everything. Once you've got that funding, once you've got that successful funding application in, record everything so that you are able to then report back to your funder. So that's me for funding. So I'm just going to run quickly over these bits and then I can answer any questions. So we're a membership organisation. We're trying to build a strong membership across the Highlands and Islands for the Climate Hub. Membership is free of charge. You can join as an individual or you can join as an organisation. You get lovely emails from us. You get the lovely smiley faced Marion there, as she is with David at Kyla Sutherland Development Trust. She'll send you a nice certificate in the post. Kind of can reaffirm that you're taking climate action in your community. You'll also get access. We're building a members area of our website where you'll be able to get access to all of these kind of spreadsheets and little tidbits of information and recordings of these sort of events that we do as well. And then also, like, you know, we're looking for your views. We want to try and really shape what happens in terms of the funding support that might be available across Scotland. And we we can provide that voice to the Scottish Government as well to try and make sure that we can make for a stronger community sector. Am I good enough with membership there, Bethany? Is there anything else that you want to add in?
No, that was lovely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, and those are our details there at the moment, which are still all at NH Climate Hub because I haven't changed them, but actually they will all still redirect to HI Climate Hub as well that you can use. And we can, I'm sure Bethany can share the website address and also the email address as well in there. So I can try and stop sharing now so that I can see faces again. Does anybody have any questions?
There are some questions in the chat from Paula. I don't know if you've had a chance to read them or not yet.
No, I can't read the chat when I'm talking. Okay, let's get blah, 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 blah. Right, I think the first one that I'm seeing is Employers National Insurance Discount from HMRC. If you are claiming Employers National Insurance discount from HMRC, then you wouldn't input into your funding application to claim Employers National Insurance from your funder. A lot of us, it depends on what you choose to do as an organisation. So we don't claim Employers National Insurance because we claim it via our funds. So you shouldn't be claiming it from two places. But it also depends on your staffing level. So if you have a staffing level where you're going to exceed the money that you get back and that ENI, then do include it. So, it's 6 and 2 3s really as to which one's the better bet. I think for me, it would generally depend on how big your staffing level is. If you're just looking at employing one person, do the Employers National Insurance discount through HMRC, but don't then also try and claim it from your funder. Where are we now? So you can do classes in QuickBooks. Yep, Paula is right. You can do classes in QuickBooks. I favour Sage. That's the one that I started using, but I'm kind of reliably informed. I've been following a conversation in the Development Trusts Association Scotland members forum, and they're kind of saying that QuickBooks may be a better bet for what we have to do for organisations, but then it's very scary if you've been using Sage to change things over. So, Paula, your next question was, how do you cost project coordinators? Is there a rough guide? Have a look at go and have a look at the Good Moves email and see what other organisations are doing as project coordinators, and have a look at their job descriptions. That's kind of what we've done. Is it depends on your region. So what we would be paying a project coordinator or a development manager maybe in Caithness isn't going to be the same as what you're going to pay in Inverness, for example. So there's no set formula as to what to pay them. I would generally go and have a look and see what other organisations are. There does generally tend to be a level of, I think probably for a project coordinator, around about that, anything from that sort of 24 to 26 in Highland. But I've seen them being lower and I've seen them being higher. So, all right, that's the end of those questions. Does anybody else have any questions? Anybody, are we all ready for a cuppa? Ewan?
I'll go for one, and apologies, I didn't have my camera on all the time, that my signal was going in and out. And if you've covered this already, when you were talking about it's £1,000 per an hour per £1,000 as a rough guide. Can you factor these costs into the application? So if you're spending 10 hours or 20 hours on a funding application, it can be hugely time consuming. Can you factor that into the application? You're shaking your head.
You can try, Ewan. I've never seen that happen before. It's not a wee trick that I've tried. I think it depends on. I mean, I suppose in a way you kind of do. I mean, like my post is, when I've been the development manager at Thursday Community Development Trust, my post has been fully funded. So, and my post was to write funding applications. That's what it was, you know. So you were looking for that salary for somebody to write funding applications. So you can factor it in that way. You can also factor in, some funders will allow you to factor in like a management kind of cost. So, you know, how much is it going to cost you to, so maybe one of the examples is, so actually Fiona's here, and Fiona's employed on the Highland Community Waste Partnership. As part of that funding, we've got, so as an organisation, for us to have that staff member, we've got a kind of management fee that's in there. And I've had that with other funds as well, is that you've maybe got a management fee of, I don't know, like anything's, you know, X amount per month. Because if you're a bigger organisation, then you've got admin staff, you've got, you know, other people, you've got a development manager, you've got lights to put on, you've got those sort of things. So you could factor it in that way. But I've never seen anybody fund for, you know, that you can write a funding application and say, took me 20 hours to write this, so I'm wanting £400 back for it. You know, that, no, I've never seen that.
So you kind of partially answered my next question, and that was, how do you cost a management fee for running a particular project?
Depends on what the costs are for your organisation. It also depends on what you might think that funder might fund. It varies, and some of them will actually tell you. So a kind of very clear example is, we have, so for Thursday Community Development Trust, we just recently got funding from the National Lottery. There was a Community Anchors Fund to do relevant to the cost of living crisis. And it was inviting organisations, it was an invitation only fund, and it was inviting organisations who were community anchors, which Thursday Community Development Trust is. We support various other local organisations and things like that as well. It was inviting us to apply for funding for dealing with the cost of living crisis. So giving out energy vouchers, giving out warm equipment and stuff like that. And in that funding application, they actually literally said 10% of however much you're applying for can be for management funds. So therefore, our application went in at 25k. We put in 10% of that as management fees for managing and handling that project. And we had staff costs on top of that as well. So there was a management fee and then there was a staff cost. So some of them will tell you, a lot of them will tell you when it's a management fee. Others are, look at what the rent of your building is, look at what the cost of heating your building is, or heating an office for that person, lighting an office for that person. Yeah, what kind of contribution might you need for your admin and finance person? Because it depends very much on what your organisation is. So, I mean, I generally, if I'm putting in for something for a management fee, I would normally put in about anything between £200 and £300 a month. If I think that I can get a bit more, then I'll put in a bit more. Because at the end of the day, we've got an admin and finance person. Like, nobody funds you for an admin and finance person. So they've got to be paid somehow. So there's no, yeah, I don't know if that's enough of an answer because there's no set formula, but I think it just depends on who it is that you're funding. But if you can get some kind of estimation of, well, how much does it actually cost to have this person in this office or to be out and about doing this? How much, you know, how much do we pay in rent per month? How much do we pay our admin and finance per month? And what's the kind of percentage for them to be managing that person, to be paying that payroll, to be handling their invoices and their receipts and looking after them?
Aye. No, that's really useful. Thanks.
Anybody else? We're ready for a cuppa. Well, I'm ready for a cuppa, so. I do hope that you've all found it useful. So, and definitely if you've got any funding queries, then yeah, our inboxes are open and we're happy to help. We're trying very hard with the hub to make us be that we're really, really accessible to people, whether you're doing climate action or you're not doing climate action, you know, we're happy to be here to be a sounding board and give somebody some time to have a look at something for them. So it's definitely what we're trying to be, is just be really, really accessible, and that you can give us a shout for anything. Okay.
That's great, Joan. I was just kind